Dear students, today we are going to start lecture 3 from chapter Elements, Compounds and Mixture. Today our topic is compounds. So let's get started. What is compound? Compound is made up of different elements. A compound is made up of different elements chemically combined in a fixed ratio. Let's take an example. Combining elements to form a compound. When the element magnesium burns in the element oxygen, when magnesium reacts with oxygen or burn in oxygen, burns mean that you will provide some energy. A brilliant white flame is seen and a new substance, magnesium oxide, is obtained. The new substance, magnesium oxide, is called a compound because in this two different elements are chemically combined. When compounds are formed, when the elements chemically combine together, it has very different properties from the elements that form it. Although you can see that this new compound contains magnesium element as well as oxygen element, but this oxygen is totally different from this oxygen. Now इसमें मैग्नीशियम ऑक्साइड में ऑक्सीजन अकेला नहीं एग्जिस्ट कर रहा, अब ये एक नई चीज़ बन गई है मैग्नीशियम ऑक्साइड. इसकी प्रॉपर्टीज़ टोटली डिफरेंट होंगी इसके रिएक्टेंट कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट से. ना तो मैग्नीशियम ऑक्साइड मैग्नीशियम जैसी प्रॉपर्टीज़ शो करेगा, ना मैग्नीशियम ऑक्साइड ऑक्सीजन जैसी कोई भी प्रॉपर्टी शो करेगा. ठीक है, टोटली डिफरेंट. ए कंपाउंड इज़ ए प्योर सब्सटेंस that contains two or more elements chemically combined. ठीक है, दो या दो से ज़्यादा एलिमेंट्स जब केमिकली कंबाइंड करते हैं तो फिर वो कंपाउंड बनाते हैं. कुछ कॉमन एग्जांपल्स कंपाउंड की. कॉमन सॉल्ट सोडियम क्लोराइड. इसमें कौन कौन से एलिमेंट्स मौजूद हैं? सोडियम है, साथ में क्लोरीन है. कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड कार्बन प्लस ऑक्सीजन. मार्बल कैल्शियम कार्बोनेट, कैल्शियम कार्बन ऑक्सीजन. कॉपर सल्फेट कॉपर सल्फर ऑक्सीजन. हाइड्रोजन क्लोराइड क्लोरीन हाइड्रोजन. So you can see that the name of compound somehow indicates the element present in it. Common compounds and the element they contain, note that the compounds have a chemical name इंडिकेटिंग द एलिमेंट्स प्रेजेंट इन दैम. कंपाउंड जो है वो इंडिकेट कर रहे हैं जो उसके अंदर एलिमेंट्स मौजूद है. ज़रूरी नहीं हर दफ़ा, लेकिन थोड़ा बहुत ये इंडिकेट करते हैं. कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड, एज यू कैन सी दैट इट कंटेन कार्बन एंड ऑक्सीजन. हाउ मैनी ऑक्सीजन? 2, एज इट इज़ रिप्रेजेंटिंग. एग्जाम्पल ऑफ केक. अ केक इज़ मेड बाय बेकिंग फ्लोर, eggs, water, sugar. After baking, the end product is nothing like the starting materials. Similarly, a compound is very different from the element that form it. As you can see that cake is totally different from its ingredients. Similarly, compound is different from its constituent elements or ingredient elements. Now, how will you name compound? A general rule: a positively charged ion in case of ionic compound. In case of ionic compound, positively charged ion is formed when an atom loses electron. A negatively charged ion is formed when atoms gain electron. There are two types of ions, cations and anions. So cations are formed or positively charged are formed when it loses electrons, and negative are formed when it gains electron. Some ions are made up of group of atoms. There are ions which are made up of group of atoms. They are called polyatomic ions. Polyatomic ions can be positively or negatively charged. Ions with Opposite charges can combine to form compounds, and these compounds are known as ionic compounds. So, how would you name these compounds? General rule for naming compounds. A compound made up of two elements has name that ends in "ide." Usually they end in name "ide." For example, sodium chloride. It is ending with "ide." Made up of elements sodium and chlorine. Zinc oxide. Again at the end "ide." Made up of elements zinc and oxygen. Carbon dioxide. Made up of element carbon and oxygen. However, there are compounds with name ending in "ide" that contain more than two elements. To name compounds that contain more than two elements, there are other rules to note. But here we will keep our topic simple, and we will only focus on a compound which contain two ions which are simple, not complex one. The next one, a compound that contain hydroxide. Hydroxide, what is hydroxide? Hydroxide, this OH negative, negatively charged ion made up of oxygen and hydrogen is named a hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide contains potassium ions and hydroxide ions. Last one, a compound that contains a negatively charged polyatomic ion containing oxygen usually has name ending in 8. अगर polyatomic नेगेटिव वाला है polyatomic तो उसका नाम 8 पे ख़त्म होता है, जैसे कॉपर सल्फेट CuSO4. Now sulfate is complex. How? And moreover it is a polyatomic anion. Why? Because it contains sulfur and oxygen, two different elements. Similarly, sodium nitrate, NaNO3. The positive one is simple, whereas the anion is complex or polyatomic because it contains two different elements, nitrogen and oxygen. Fixed composition of compounds. Compound always have fixed composition. A compound is made up of different elements chemically combined in a fixed ratio. For example, water जहाँ मर्जी से ले लें, composition क्या रहेगी? Water की H2O means 2 atoms of hydrogen element and single atom of oxygen element. Is a compound made only by joining together two elements of hydrogen to one atom of oxygen, H2O.